It was a policy horror because it was predicted in a committee just like this one. My conclusion is that the immigration policy was, in effect, a transfer of wealth from the young and working class to the old and rich. Canada's recent immigration turn was perhaps the single worst policy error in Canadian history. It was sold as an all-purpose growth strategy, but by tripling population growth via immigration of mostly younger, low-skilled, low-wage people, this has had significant second-order impacts that have wide-ranging negative impacts on housing, healthcare, productivity growth, and of course, youth unemployment. According to the Bank of Canada's 2025 staff paper by Charlemagne, Long, Poulin, and Moore, the policy design quietly shifted labor market risk onto the youngest workers, deepening wage pressures, by extension, worsening youth unemployment and disenfranchising Canada's working class. The pivot is compositional. Since 2025, and dramatically in 2023 and 2024, non-permanent residents replaced permanent residents as the main driver of population growth, fueled by international mobility program permits and a surge in study permits. In the labor force survey of microdata that was referred to in this paper, the NPR workers have become markedly younger and less experienced, and the share of NPRs who are students hit 16.4% in 2023-2024, and the average potential experience fell to 11.5. At the same time, their footprint shifted towards lower productivity service sector jobs, exactly the rungs young Canadians traditionally climb first. There was a price effect. Average nominal wage between NPRs and Canadian-born workers more than doubled from 9.5% in 2006 to 2014 to negative 22.6% in 2023-24. And the authors of that paper, which I cite, talk about the widening gap is almost entirely explained by observable traits, less experience, different industries, occupation, birth region effects, meaning it's structural and not a mirage. How did this translate into youth unemployment and underemployment? First, it intensified competition of hiring at the margin. Employers facing a glut of young temporary workers with open work or LMIA exempt status can fill schedules flexibly and cheaply, reducing the incentives to invest in training or create stable junior roles. Second, wage compression at the bottom rungs lowers search efficiencies. Third, there was credential downgrading spreads. When universities of students and recent graduates in domestic and international crowd into low-skilled positions, substitution pushes other young workers out or into shorter shifts. And finally, churn begets churn. I want to be clear. None of this is an indictment on the immigrants. My parents were both immigrants to Canada. This is an indictment on a government policy mix that prioritized volume and administrative ease over labor market integration, wage floors, and the basic inability to consider the second-order effects of the immigration policy. The bank's paper quietly concluded that the composition matters. Canada's chosen composition has pushed down the ladder where young workers stand. And that's not an accident. It was a policy horror because it was predicted in a committee just like this one. My conclusion is that the immigration policy was, in effect, a transfer of wealth from the young and working class to the old and rich. Now, supply and demand dynamics affect all kinds of markets, and naturally this is true for labor markets. Increased supply and prices, or in this case wages, will fall, and the opposite is also true. And this forces us to consider the counterfactual. Persistent labor market vacancies, especially for low-skilled, low-wage earners, would have led to higher wages, which would have forced businesses to invest more in training and invest more in retention and CapEx more generally, which would have increased productivity growth. And this would have benefited all Canadians and reduced inequality. The immigration policy we've suffered has done the exact opposite. If we don't want opportunity to become a euphemism for young people, we need to change the plumbing. We need to throttle LMIA exempt channels to genuine public interest cases. We need to align international students' intake with housing, which we're sort of doing, I guess, and the labor market, and enforce the sectoral wage and hour standards aggressively. We need to tie employer access to demonstrable training investments and convert more temporary pathways into stable, permanent residency so that firms have a reason to upskill young new hires rather than replace them.